Hello, Pragya. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
बस
So
बढ़िया.
nice to see you after so long.
I know. तुम्हारी शादी के बाद से we are meeting now.
I know, सही वक्त में शादी हो गई. This was the last bonanza for all of us to get together and have a good time.
I know, I
Hello
know.
everyone who's here as well, and thank you for having me, Appa. You've been doing such a fabulous job. I have to say, you've single-handedly probably made the lockdown worth it by doing a lot of live sessions and some very extraordinary conversations that you've been having, particularly on history. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for talking to me.
Thank you so much. And this session I started I think, yeah, when the lockdown just started. My first guest was Ali Khan Mahmoodabad. And today this is my last session for those who are joining. And today we have somebody who represents a collective, Indian History Collective. So Pragya Tiwari, of course, does not need any introduction. She's very well known. She's a very famous journalist, editor, and now she has started this Indian History Collective, which is what we are going to talk about today. So I will give just a little, I think there are 3 more minutes before people join in. So let everybody come in because, so we can just keep talking till then. So how's everything going with you a week?
Everything is fine. Can't say fine, but hanging in there, trying to keep our patience, trying to put one foot in front of the other, I think, with lots of people, and trying to make some sense of what is happening in the world and in our surroundings, particularly in this country, and trying to respond to it like you are, and cooking like you are.
Yes, I think we all are. We are trying to win.
So while we're waiting for people to join, for those of you who are already here, Appa just said that this is her last session in terms of the lives that she's been doing on Instagram, but I might be getting ahead of myself, but I'm going to tell you all that she's starting something very exciting and new that is coming up. So you will get to see a lot more of her and hear a lot more of her, just in a slightly different format. Perhaps at the end of this session, she'll be able to tell us a little bit more about it.
Thank you so much. I'm starting these online walks, virtual walks called Walk Through History. 12 monuments, and I don't just walk you through the monument, I walk you through the entire structure. Like when I talk about Lodi Gardens, I talk about the evolution of tomb architecture in India. When we go to Bihar, I talk about rock cut architecture in the Barabar caves. How did rock cut architecture start in the world, which is the first one, and by chance I've been to the first rock cut architecture in the world, that is in Egypt. And then I come to Bihar. So there's a lot of things to be seen, to be learned for all over India. And that is what I'll be doing in my walk through history. It's an online virtual.
It sounds very exciting. And for all of us who are missing travel in particular, this is going to be God sent, because at least there will be that feeling of going to a place and seeing it through your eyes and learning so much about it.
Thank you so much. Yes, I hope everybody enjoys it. That's what I plan to do through PowerPoint presentations, to walk you through all these places and give you my take of how I felt when I went there, what were the events that happened in that particular place, etc., etc. And there is a video on that on Instagram as well as on YouTube. So you can watch that and see which other places we are going to. So I think now that
I'm very excited. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to having you there. And now that it's 5 o'clock, good evening, everybody. 5, I'm saying, sorry, 7. Good evening, everybody. All those who have come, I am delighted to have Pragya with me. Pragya is one of my, I think, oldest friends in Delhi. I had just shifted to Delhi when I met you with Sabha.
Very proud of that accolade.
Yes. So one of the first people I met when I shifted to Delhi from Dubai. So Pragya has started this very exciting new project called the Indian History Collective. Can you just tell us something about that? What is it? Who all are the people behind it? And what's your intention behind it?
So, Appa, it's what can best be described as a knowledge forum. The idea is to publish historical texts that are either by history scholars or historians who are legitimate, who have been peer-reviewed, who are acclaimed historians, and whose work is considered important in the stream of history itself, as well as a lot of original sources. And just to kind of publish these sources online, present them really, really well, so that even though they are long, they are presented in a way that's easy for people to read, and make them accessible for the first time. Because as you know, Appa, I mean, India, unfortunately, large numbers of people don't really have access to libraries, they don't have access to books, they don't have access to digital archives, they don't have access to academic archives. I mean, people like yourself, people like me, we were fortunate enough perhaps to grow up in homes where we had the privilege of not just education, but also, beyond education. Our parents read. My father is an avid reader, so I got exposed to a lot of texts, whether it be literature or history or Indology or whatever it might be, and was able to access a lot of it. But books are expensive, and for a large part of this country, even education is not so easy to get. So I felt like there was a need for a knowledge forum where a lot of historical texts could easily be available for anybody who would care to read them and interpret them for themselves. So that's what the Indian History Collective is supposed to be. It's very early days. We are still dealing. A lot of tech is still being developed. It's what you can call in its beta sort of phase. We have just about started publishing for the last month. So this is me and two childhood friends of mine who you know very well, Rishi Majumdar and Kavi Bhansali. And we've all been doing very different things, all with our lives, as jobs, as professionals. But for a very long time, this was something that we wanted to do. And the lockdown gave us that opportunity, because we were like, okay, a lot of things are on hold. This is something we've been talking about for a long time. So let's just get the ball rolling. And we did. Why we did this, of course, is should be obvious, but I'll still sort of go over it very briefly. Now, history has been a sort of battlefield for politics across the world, across ages. That's not something that's new. But what is new, perhaps, and this is not just happening in India, but it's happening across the world, is that history is not just being distorted, it's being falsified in order to weaponize it, to utilize it as a tool for political mobilization, for social mobilization, and not positive political and social mobilization, but negative political and social mobilization, by which we mean to create rifts between communities, to create divisions between people, to sow hatred in the hearts of people. And while if there was a real and fair reading of history, it's not to say that people would not discover that there have been wrongdoings, but what people would discover is that there is a lot of context and nuance to historical wrongdoings, and be able to understand, be able to have a more holistic, nuanced perspective about what really happened and what it really means, and realize that a lot of what is being told to them is not, in fact, true. So that is one reason. But I think even over and above that, history is really, really important. It's terribly important for people to understand who we are as individuals. What is our culture? What is the evolution of our religion or our, sort of identities as individuals, as communities, as a nation? And it's sort of our roots which we kind of lose sight of over time, and they help us really define who we want to be in the future. So I think it's also that. But also, finally, it's just fabulous stories. I mean, as somebody who loves stories, there is no better place to go for crazy, mad, wild, exciting stories than history. So I think all of these reasons made us want to push through and do this.
And as Parmesh says, it's a vital conversation. And
Hi,
hugs,
Pavni. So lovely
hugs
to
for
see
you
you.
to you. Yes, hug back to you also. And since you've talked about history becoming a battlefield for politics, what are the challenges that can foresee that you will be facing?
So, Appa, actually the first and the most important challenge is always internal.
Hmm.
We all talk about um, the biased lenses through which history is being looked at and presented today. But somewhere those biases also exist within us, you know. So those lenses of ideology also might color our approach to history, to what we highlight, to what we publish. So I think the first struggle is to look within and to say genuinely that we should, as much as possible, put aside our own ideological, political motivations and be honest and truthful to the science of history, to the texts that exist, and present them no matter what comes out, whether even if it is something that we wouldn't like to believe ourselves. And I think, of course, the second big challenge is to win people's trust, to be able to convince people to read history for what it is, rather than get defensive, get closed, and worry about finding things that might shake their convictions or make them question things that they blindly believe in. Because it's like a bitter medicine. जब आपको बुखार आता है और आपको कोई दवाई दे, so your first reaction, kadvi dawai kada pee ke, is that you don't want to have it. So I feel like a lot of, if you really give people history as it is, people across the spectrum will want to say, no, 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 let's stop, let's not do this, this is wrong, this might. But I think to inoculate people, you need to give that in correct doses and encourage people to read it without the lenses that they've been handed out for free, and which are very dangerous and distortive.
Also, it's very important to keep talking about history, bring it out of just a very small select circle of academia and bring it out into the public domain, and so that
Absolutely,
everybody can discuss it.
Which is what you have been doing, and it's so great that you've been doing that, because otherwise it's such a rarefied, even popular history books. I mean, forget about academic history, which is completely inaccessible unless you have studied history. Even popular history books, most of them tend to be in English, most of them tend to be available, they're very expensive, most of them are sort of alienating, because a person who goes to college and who a lot of people actually might just think, I am not the kind of person who would, if that's an intellectual book, I'm not the kind of person who will understand this book or who this is meant. But once they start reading it, it's they'll realize that this is for everybody. So I think that is, of course, the limitation that we have right now is also we are still only publishing in English, but very soon we hope to publish in other languages as well.
Yes, I was about to say that you should be thinking of Hindi and other regional languages, because Hindi and
Yes.
other regional languages is where we have a lot of readership. In fact,
Yes. So that is,
I'm
yeah, sorry,
starting
you were saying.
podcast. I said I'm starting podcasts, which I'll be doing in Hindustani, so that I can reach a wider audience than with just my English writing.
That's fabulous. That is a very, very, very good idea. And I think that's for us also. But one of the things, of course, is that we've started this ourselves. So resources are limited. We want it to be a not-for-profit. We want it to be pro bono. We don't want it, we want to create a genuine collective. So resources are going to be a challenge, but what we're absolutely committed to is making sure that we can keep introducing at least one new language every 6 to 7 months. So go from Hindi to Bengali to maybe Kannada to Malayalam, and just have a host of languages in which we're translating texts that are originally maybe available only in English or even not that, and making them accessible to a much wider readership. Definitely, that is definitely on the agenda.
That's an excellent initiative, and I hope you can all the best for it, and I hope it happens very soon. And I'm sure you'll start getting sponsorship as well as resources once the caravan starts rolling, because this is something we all need. And not just one person, because you have so many other people on board, and also you will be taking voices from everybody. So that again is a very big advantage, because say for myself, on my blog, I'm the only one who's writing. So it's only my point of view that people read. But when for a blog, for a website like yours, where you will be having so many people writing, so many excerpts coming, so many book reviews, etc., coming, people have a variety of history readings to do and to gain from.
Absolutely. And I just want to, there's somebody called Kabir P 2018 who has said that why is Indian history a sole domain for Marxists? So I don't know about whether that's true. That's definitely not true. Rather, there are Marxist historians. But before I comment on that, even as I speak right now, what we are doing is curating letters of Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, which he wrote from the prison, and they are on our Twitter feed as I am speaking. Another colleague of mine is doing that, and our Twitter handle is Indian History _C. And the reason why we're putting out his letters is because, again, he's one of those personalities who has not been written about extensively. There are only 1 or 2 books. There is Tathagata Roy's book, and then there is Balraj Madhok's books. Obviously, these are colleagues of his. They belong to a certain ideology, so there is a particular lens through which they are looking at his life. There are parts of the books that are sort of colored by propaganda. But he was a very, very important personality. And if one has to understand the genesis of right-wing thought and politics in India, Shyama Prasad Mukherjee's life is very, very important to that. And I think the only existing source to really understand is his own writings, his own speeches, and his own letters, which are not even in print anymore. So we are putting some of those letters out so that it's not our view on Shyama Prasad Mukherjee or somebody else's view on Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, but his own letters, his own words that you can read for yourself and figure out what you think. And I think, with due respect to the BJP who's been talking about Shyama Prasad Mukherjee all day, a great service would be to make those letters available once again, then put up hideous statues of him all over the country.
I saw today, I think it was Akar Patel, who was sharing letters by Gowalkar after the assassination of Gandhiji. And what he
not
had
an
to
Indian
say.
history collector.
Akar Patel. Akar Patel.
Yeah,
Akar
Akar
Patel
was. Yes.
Akar Patel was putting it up, and I felt it's a very important thing for us to know what they were saying at that point of time, because he has, in which Gowalkar is condemning Godse. Those letters,
so
which he
actually,
had put up.
that is another thing that I'm really hoping to do. Now, Appa, one can't mince words about it, but unfortunately, we've not had very good right-wing, credible right-wing historians or intellectuals who have put together historical texts or perspectives. I know it's a controversial statement, and I'm not saying there are none, but they're very, very few, and we know that. But we don't want to completely leave that part of history out. So one is trying to, as you know, I've been researching the RSS for many years. So the idea is for me to be able to put forth as many original documents as are possible from the RSS. Of course, R.C. Majumdar is, yes, Kabir, I do follow R.C. Majumdar's work, but he's one of the very, very few people who has done work where right-wing history is concerned. If you compare that to, for example, Marxist historians or whatever, then there is a dearth of history told from the right-wing perspective. Most of it, unfortunately, is just bilge or propaganda. So what one can do to make up for that is present a lot of original source documents. So what Appa was talking about, what the RSS has been writing about itself, what letters have been exchanged, what speeches have been delivered, and what has been published themselves, by themselves, about themselves. So for us to be able to understand the evolution of that as well and see it for what it is, whether you criticize it, like it, don't like it, at least it's out there unfiltered for all of us to judge for ourselves.
And R.C. Majumdar's history, in fact, in school and college, I did read R.C. Majumdar. His history is very, very authentic. His views, he has not distorted history or tried to rewrite it. He has put his history books, in fact, I would say excellent. So he was not
Absolutely.
shunted out. It's
Absolutely.
just that all books keep getting updated. And I don't know where you are coming from, Kabir. Jadunath Sarkar is not forgotten. Every other person who writes on Aurangzeb keeps quoting him. So he's definitely not forgotten. It's
In
just
fact,
that,
just this year, yeah, we've had a book on Jadunath Sarkar written
yes.
by
Ha.
by an eminent historian, and it's called History Men,
Ha.
and it's by Raghavan, TCA Raghavan, who's a historian and a former
Ha.
diplomat, and he's written a book, a biography of Jadunath Sarkar. So no, he's definitely not been forgotten. It's been published by Penguin. It's a fantastic book. I have it, and you should read it.
And the other thing is that we should stop being defensive. Why isn't Jadunath Sarkar talked about? Why is so and so talked about? Everybody's work speaks for themselves. And as I said, Jadunath Sarkar is somebody even I've been quoting. I've quoted him in a lot of my articles. And as I said, I grew up reading R.C. Majumdar. So, this putting this burden on the other person that you read this, you don't read that. That is not what historians do. Historians present an event, and yes, the analysis is what matters. They do not try to say change the course of history. They do not change the effect or the whatever it is that the result of history. So that is not what historians do. They put it out there. They put out the facts out there for everybody to read. What does Himanshu is saying? दोनों लोग को नमस्ते, हम बस अभी आए हैं. Himanshu, आपका इंतजार था. Himanshu Bajpai is from Lucknow and one of the most wonderful storytellers. And okay, so to get back.
Welcome Himanshu. आप हमारे मुल्क के हैं, हम भी अवध से हैं. So welcome, happy to see Gharwalas here.
And to come back to the history project, now in 1811, a book was written by a man called James Mills, The History of India. He had never come to India. He divided Indian history into three parts. Hindu period, Muslim period, and British. Now, the British period did not become Christian, it was British. And in that, he tried to show that the Hindu period was, of course, the glory period, the Muslims were barbarians, and the British came to save the Indians from the Muslims, which is the narrative that is being sought to again be promoted. Later on, of course, it was changed and it became ancient, medieval, and modern. Now, when he talked about the Hindu period, he forgot that there were rulers who were not Hindu. In the Muslim period, we had the Vijayanagar dynasty. There were so many other dynasties, the Udaygiri in the dynasty in Odisha, etc. There were so many of them. So there were a lot of flaws in the way that that book was written, but it is something that has now become a template for a lot of people, especially for WhatsApp. So how are you planning now to counter the distortions, the WhatsApp, especially the WhatsApp? That is what worries me the most. The WhatsApp messages that keep coming, and people I've seen history teachers talk about the WhatsApp messages as being real.
So, Appa, you're absolutely right. James Mills started a campaign which was obviously to further the colonial agenda in the country, as a lot of stuff that at that time that was being written. I mean, of course, I'm not saying that there weren't British historians or scholars who, did commendable, or European rather, scholars or who didn't do commendable work when it came to Indian history, who've done a great deal of good work as well. But by and large, there was, of course, an agenda in terms of how the colonial masters and scholars were writing history or talking about India's history. One, like you said, dividing it up into Hindu, Muslim, British periods. Of course, there's a problem with that because there were Muslim rulers during the Hindu period and Hindu rulers during the Muslim period. But even more so, the way in which kingdoms were run. There wasn't. When we talk about rulers and kingdoms, India, there was a lot of there were many heterogeneous forms of shall we say government in India. There were places where there might have been a ruler, a symbolic ruler, but the government was run in a very different way. The power behind the throne was somebody else. The military sort of alliances that were happening that were keeping different kingdoms afloat and when you go into those kinds of nuances, you realize that this sort of dividing up the country in terms of the religion of the so-called ruler is just completely humbug. It absolutely does nothing in terms of classification for us to be able to truly understand the history of India, right? So, but of course, now that has stuck. And what is, of course, ironical is that there was a project, to quote Kyongo, to decolonize our minds, to decolonize our narratives that we were all invested in. However, the right wing in this country that ostensibly wants to purge colonial writing of history is now taking recourse to the same kinds of tropes that were employed by the colonial writers of history in order to divide India into these kind of silos of Hindu India and Muslim India and Christian India and so on and so forth. That's very, very unfortunate. And one doesn't quite know what they are really trying to achieve with that, because in a way it's sort of counterproductive to their own larger mission of decolonization of the Indian mind, right, and to reestablish a truly Indian identity. Having said that, I think the best possible way to root out the kind of prejudices that have been instilled by whether it's a Mills or historians who emulated him thereafter, or now what you have, which is the vilest form of history, what is WhatsApp history, is to basically give people access to all kinds of historical perspectives on India. And that would include, to my mind, the colonial perspective of India as well. And I think that, we are in the midst of a global sort of campaign on Black Lives Matter. And it's interesting how historical debates are being conducted at this point in time, where a lot of statues are being taken down. People are saying, let's take Churchill's statue down, let's take Robert Clive's statue down. And I, for one, am very worried of erasing any aspect of history, no matter how thorny. I think it's really, really important for us to let thorny, difficult aspects of history and expressions of history exist, to contextualize them and to make them available so that history doesn't repeat itself. I mean, this is an old adage. What we, if we forget history, we're condemned to repeat it. So I think it's really, really important that we preserve this, and we say that this is what Mills was writing, or this is what the right wing is writing today, and contextualize it, and also present other works of history that kind of help people understand that there is a lot more to it than what is being said here, So, of course, that's easier said than done, because how do you counter something like WhatsApp, which is so rampant, with limited resources of time, money, etc.? So for that, there are two things. One, I've already mentioned, that a lot of publishing in regional languages, reaching out to a lot of students, young people, giving them access, building confidence in people that we are not coming from a particular agenda or a particular sort of ideology, and we are really here to present what the riches of Indian history writing have to offer for every single Indian. And finally, using social media in a sort of very savvy way. And I think you've done that wonderfully. And for people like myself who come from a digital background, who've been editors in the digital space, this is something that we can offer, to be able to, with all our understanding of the digital media and social media, to be able to use that, to harness that, to reach out to as many people as we possibly can, including maybe start WhatsApp broadcasts, and present capsules of history which are not dumbed down, but which will give people just enough for them to whet their appetite and to come and maybe consume a more wholesome diet of history, rather than the sort of very cheap snacks that they are being fed.
And see history through the lens of historical causation, not through religion. That, I think, is one of the most important things that we can do, service that we can do for history and for our people. Yes, we are taking questions. If you have any questions, you can type them. I'll read them out, or Pragya can read them out herself. So we will be taking questions. So what are the what is your big historical project at the moment? You said Shama Prasad Mukherjee's letters. Apart
And
from
that's
that,
something we're doing today. So, I mean, so far we've published a bunch of texts, and I'll just go over some of the stuff that we've done to
please.
give people an idea of where we are coming from. So, one of the things that we discovered while talking to a lot of people is that even though Ambedkar is so widely talked about and is such a controversial figure in our times, and such a, sort of politically contested figure in our times, not many people have actually read Annihilation of Caste. And we spoke to a lot of people, and I, particularly when I was traveling for, reportage, and I was reporting on the RSS, etc., I would ask people, have you read Annihilation of Caste? And the answer I would get very surprisingly is that no, even these are people who could read English, that no, it's a very difficult text. And I was like, have you tried reading it? Because it's not, And I think that made us want to make sure that Annihilation of Caste in a sort of very accessible format is available on the website in 2 parts, highlighted, portions highlighted, for people to be able to read the original text. I mean, just instead of having, following Twitter threads of fights over, who Ambedkar belongs to, just read his original text and decide for yourself. I mean, there is nobody who he does not take on in that particular text. So, just read it for yourself. And some parts of it are extremely discomforting. They are very, very difficult to read and understand. But we really wanted it to be out there, even though it's such a talked about text. So something as popular as Annihilation of Caste, but also then to make rare texts available. So again, Naxalism is something that, again, the phrase urban Naxal has become so widely used in India. And of course, it started with trolls, and it started with people abusing, maligning, abusing, whatever, calling out left-wing intellectuals, and then left-wing intellectuals using it for themselves, etc., etc. But we forget that to a large number of young people today, they might not even really know what Naxalism was. Where did it come from? And again, it's one of those periods of history that are not very well documented. But we managed to find, there's this guy called Sumanta Banerjee, who's a historian. But he started off as a journalist who embedded himself within the movement, documented the entire movement as an insider, as somebody who was implanted within the movement, and then went on to study, become a cultural theorist and a historian, went on to study history and write from it from that perspective, uses notes to write as a historian would write. Unfortunately, that book is very rare, it's out of print, it's not really widely available. So we carried a very, very important excerpt from that, which would give people a very good sense of what Naxalism really was, where did it start, what was really happening around then, and who were the people who were involved. So, we have texts like that, but I think a lot of it is also in the curation, Appa. So, because of thanks to you, we carried an excerpt from Ira Mukherjee's new book on Akbar. And it's a wonderful biography of Akbar. It's one of many biographies of Akbar. And it was a difficult decision for me to make as to what exactly about Akbar should one carry. Now, Akbar is one of those interesting sort of personalities who's probably India's best known emperor. And, there are various sides of history, right? Of course, there's this sort of right-wing history trying to portray him and all the Mughals in one broad brush as evil Muslims who took over this country and, made us gulam, etc., etc. But there's also been a sort of secular, for the lack of a better word, left-wing push and anxiety to paint Akbar as a secular character, as somebody, and this is this sometimes reveals the hypocrisy within the left wing as well, where we feel comfortable when we talk about somebody as shunning their religious identity, particularly their Muslim identity, in order to be able to exalt them. So a lot of us actually grew up reading, even in our textbooks, that he founded a new religion, which was the Ilahi, and the implication was that he did not really follow Islam anymore, that he walked away from Islam. There was this portrayal of him as a secular character. And I was very keen, therefore, to carry a chapter called Badshah-e-Islam, which debunks both sides, which not just debunks the right-wing's portrayal of him as a Muslim tyrant, it also somewhat challenges the left-wing conception of Akbar as somebody who had shunned his or sort of shed his Muslim identity. And what this chapter talks about is how, far from shedding his Muslim identity, Akbar proclaims himself the sort of Badshah of Islam, and essentially says that he is to be the interpreter of the Sharia law. Of course, it's interesting that he was illiterate, and how he manages to do this and how he disregards the authority of the Ottoman rulers, and how he, by doing that, starts to kind of reinterpret and formulate an Indian Islamic identity, which is so pervasive today. So I think for me it was about choosing that chapter which challenges all sorts of popular notions, but also gives us a wonderful sort of cross-section slice of life about the sort of texture of the cultural life and social life of Akbar's court, about him giving galis to somebody and what kind of galis he would give and all of that. Because in the end, if you're not having fun, nobody's going to be reading history anymore. I mean, we can't force people to read if they are not having fun. So I think both these elements are really important when we are selecting what texts we want to push out and how we want to push out text. So I think, I mean, these are just some examples of stuff that we've managed to do. But I think another really important aspect that we are trying to highlight through the text that we are publishing is the kind of debates we were having about ourselves. I mean, a lot of questions that we are faced with today are not new. They've been grappled with before. And so, for example, we've carried this sort of very thorny and acerbic exchange of letters between Sukhdev and Gandhiji, and the clash of their views. We've carried Nehru criticizing the sort of the hubris within the Indian National Congress under a pseudonym, and questioning whether his own democratic impulses are secure from the temptations of dictatorship. And this is such a prescient text in terms of what was to come, where Indira Gandhi was concerned. So just a lot of these conversations that we were having about ourselves, Tagore on nationalism, questioning a lot of, and must have taken a lot of guts to question nationalism at a time when all his colleagues were identifying themselves, his peers, as ardent nationalists. So I think just a lot of very interesting conversations that have happened about who we are, where we come from, and help those threads become parts of our conversations in order for them to become richer. I think that's just a broad scope of what we are working on. One last thing, like I said, we're trying to make it a genuine collective. So we've started a collaboration with Modern Review. Modern Review, as some of you might know, used to be a fantastic periodical back in the day before independence. It was edited by somebody who would now be very clearly identified as a right-wing intellectual. However, there was Gandhi, there was Nehru, there was Tagore, there was Naidu, there were all kinds of people writing for it. And unfortunately, the digital archives of the periodical are no longer available. So we've started a project to digitize them. And Devanshu Datta and Nilanjana Roy are helping us do that in order to bring some of the writings from the Modern Review back to life and make them accessible to people. And we hope to start many such collaborations in order to make a lot of this history accessible.
Please give the name of your website once again for all those who've joined.
Absolutely. So it's indianhistorycollective.com, and on Twitter we're indianhistory_c. So that's those are the places. And please, if you're listening to this, do check it out. It's very early stages. There's a lot more happening, but we really want it to be a collective to send us answers, to send us questions, send us feedback, send us even answers to some of the questions that we are grappling with. And we really want everybody to be a part of it. So that's really, really important to us, and I hope that you will be a part of whatever it is that we're trying to do.
So there's this question, Pragya, from Balaji. There is a dark period of discontinuity between Indus Valley civilization and Vedic history, giving the space for ideologies to make their own theories. How can we address this?
So the best way to address it is, you're right, there is a dark period there, and what I would call a blind spot. But when the blind spot is sort of exacerbated when we only rely on published texts that are available. When you look at the sum of archaeology, of sort of other forms of historical narratives, of linguistics, of academic papers, again, there is actually, in fact, a lot of material. Unfortunately, a lot of this is not really available for everybody to access. I mean, even I've tried reading papers on the Indus Valley civilization and post the Indus Valley civilization, and a lot of it is frankly not something that I would understand at first pass. I have to really sort of break it down. So we're really hoping to work with historians on this and make a lot of this accessible so that it is easy to understand without dumbing it down, without taking away nuances, and without compromising on the integrity of the work by the particular historian who has written it in a sort of academic form. But the same thing goes with linguistics in terms of the efforts that have been made to decipher the Indus Valley script, which of course, as we all know, has not yet been deciphered. That doesn't mean that progress has not been made, theories have not arisen. By studying a lot of Indology as well. I mean, Indology is something that's not often study of religious sort of scriptures from around that time, and to really understand even when you study mythology is not history, but mythology gives us a very good sense of what history might be. So, when you read classicists such as Mary Beard, they give you a very important lens through mythology to be able to understand history without taking mythology literally. So again, a lot of those sources exist, and we hope to sort of plumb them and bring them out and make them easy to understand, easy to read, and so that there may not be that one authoritative text, but if you read 50 and if you read them from all directions, hopefully you'll get a very good idea of where the truth might lie.
This seems really wonderful. And there's one question from Himanshu, which I hope you will also take in consideration. He says, oral history ko hamaiya sanjeedgi se nahi liya jata. And oral history, Himanshu deals with oral history, especially of Lucknow. That is something really important, that we start documenting oral history. There are people who are documenting oral history, and I think we should be concentrating more on that. As he says, ke Gadar ke phool hai, Amritlal Nagar ka. Ek second, I think I have lost track of where I was for the question. Yes, aa gaye, haan. There's somebody's asked, how can we prevent this rewriting of history? Is it possible to undo the false narratives which a lot of WhatsApp students believe, and how is the future? I think you already talked about this.
Yeah, we kind of did. I mean, we're all making efforts. APA's making that effort. We're all making that effort. The best way is make everything available, let people have original stuff to read, and hopefully they will read it. Indians are very smart people. They're very intelligent people. We haven't come so far by being WhatsApp idiots. And I do believe in the average citizen of this country to, when given access, we deprive a lot of our citizens of resources that we have. We give it to them. We don't need to explain anything to them. They are as smart, if not smarter, than all of us. The only thing we can do as people who have been given the privilege of education is to pass on the benefits of it. And, that's it. The rest of it will take care of itself. I do believe in this country, and I'm sure APA does as well, which is why we do what we do.
That's why we do what we do. And Matt Mughals, yes, even I'm missing true Indology. True Indology has one purpose in life, and that's to keep seeing my tweets and trying to say that whatever I'm writing is not wrong without understanding what I'm writing. Is history such a, Rachita's asking, is history such a favorite topic because of our upbringing? Calcutta, Delhi has history as dining table conversations. Is that going away now?
It is going away in a way, and it is not. Like, in a sense, history is becoming, in fact, so prominent today that we can't talk about anything without bringing, 20 layers of history into it. I mean, we're literally at a parody space in our lives where, if somebody asks the government a question, they say, but Nehru did this. I mean, this is not a cliche. This is literally happening every single day. And so I don't think Nehru has been as important as he is now ever in the scheme of things. And the same thing holds true for medieval history, and so much of our sort of talking about the Saraswati River and the Ramjan Bhumi and, Babar and, all of that. So in a sense, history has pervaded all kinds of conversations today. But what we are losing is a sort of liberated enjoyment of history, where it's become this sort of very serious, contentious, controversial, bitter, divisive thing in our society, in our lives, instead of being that sort of rich, zaikedar way of, conceiving the truth, conceptualizing the truth, and perceiving the truth about ourselves and about our past. And I think that rust and that truth, if we can bring that back into our history and shake away a little bit of that very serious bitterness about it, we'll go back to the place where we used to be, where history used to be everywhere, in a good way, in a fun way, without people coming at each other's throats.
There's this question from Oxblood Ruffin. Is there any statuary you can think of that couldn't be contextualized without being unduly inflammatory?
Any statue that couldn't be contextualized without being I don't know what you mean by unduly inflammatory. Oxy, I don't know if you've been on Twitter, but everything is unduly inflammatory nowadays. I mean, absolutely everything. So I don't really know.
I think he's on Twitter at the same handle.
Yes, I know. So I really, I think everything is unduly inflammatory at this point in time, and it shouldn't be. But I don't know. I think my answer would be Ambedkar. I think if we were to really put out everything Ambedkar has ever said, I think Ambedkar and Gandhi, despite being very opposed to each other, have a lot of things in common in terms of their intellectual progression, not in terms of maybe their ideology and so on and so forth. Both are people who have written extensively, who are very, very prolific, and who have sort of matured intellectually in public life. So what we see is, when you see their earlier works, there might be a lot of things that don't square very well with what they've written in the middle period of their lives or towards the end of their lives. Their beliefs have evolved, their ideology has evolved. And when you read the entirety of it, I think Ambedkar might be somebody who might be difficult to digest for everybody, including the hardcore proponents or those who call themselves Ambedkarites. And I think that's the truly fascinating and amazing thing about Ambedkar. I hope I don't get abused for saying this. But Appa, I would like to hear your answer. Who would you choose?
I have this thing. I actually do feel that I don't agree with you. I do think that statues which are not, what should I say, are unpleasant or have unpleasant memories for people of because of their past tyrannies or whatever it is, like say for example Robert Clive or the statue that was toppled in USA. I think they should be removed, or they should be at least kept away out of public domain, in maybe like we have the statues of George V, etc., kept in Coronation Park in Delhi, something like that. I don't believe in destroying anything. I don't believe in destruction, but I do believe that they should be removed from public space. I'll tell you, I went to Iran last year and I went to see the Sadabad Palace, which is where the Shah of Iran, Raza Shah Pahlavi, used to live with Faradiba. So as soon as I entered, I saw these huge pair of boots there, copper boots, and they were taller. The boots themselves were taller than me. And I didn't pay any attention to it. I said, must be some kind of artifact because that whole palace has been turned into a museum. I went in, and in the first room itself, they preserved everything belonging to Raza Shah and Faradiba. Now, it's now an Islamic republic where Raza Shah and his values are absolutely not accepted. But they have preserved the everything, and that is what I loved about Iran, that there has been no destruction of anything because of change in ideology. Whether it is Raza Shah or whether it is his father's, both their palaces are beautifully maintained. It is only later when I came out and I started reading about those boots, I found that there is a possibility that it was a copper statue of Raza Shah himself, which was broken and damaged during the revolution in 1979. Nobody knows for sure, but that's what is said, that, just the boots are left and the rest of it has been demolished. But as I said, that's a reminder there that, सब ठाट पड़ा रह जाएगा जब लाख चलेगा बंजारा और या वो कि सब ताज उछाले जाएंगे. So it's a stark reminder of that. So these things do remind us of history. They do remind us of unpleasant truths as well as things that has happened in the past. But I am a very peaceful person. I like very pleasant things. So I would say that anything which is inflammatory should be removed from public spaces, not destroyed but kept away.
There I agree with you, but my only thing would be that if there is a Robert Clive statue somewhere, instead of destroying it, instead of the plaque reading Robert Clive who commanded such and such force or etc., let there be a long plaque that contextualizes what role he had to play, what historians have said about him, including someone like William, who has written so evocatively about Clive's very, very checkered history. Let that, and today, one of the most brilliant things that we have at our disposal is technology. So even where we have statues, etc., displayed, you're not just reliant on a plaque. You can have a screen that gives you a lot more information, gives you reading material, that gives you audio tools. So let that remain as a memorial of tyranny, a memorial of colonization, a memorial of cruelty that was inflicted on other people, so that people remember and people don't forget. And I think that is what I meant by let's not destroy anything, because if we erase Robert Clive, then we have also unwittingly erased
that history.
The fact that
yes,
oppression existed.
Public memory.
And that is important.
As I said, Iran, everything is preserved, whether it is the Safavis, the Qajar, the Pahlavis, the entire history is preserved for all to see. And they take a great deal of pride in their heritage. So it's all beautifully maintained. Another thing that, my memory is such, I was just thinking of another place where memories have been preserved and I've forgotten it. I'll come back to that. Somebody wants to know if there's an opportunity.
Just wanted to say, sorry, I just wanted to quickly comment on what Himanshu ji had said. I don't know if he's still listening, but my interest in history first was sparked off by oral history and oral historians. So I really hope that that is a vertical that we'll be able to really develop when it comes to Indian History Collective. And it's particularly important in India, where archives and books are so difficult to find and have not been very well preserved and sort of made widely accessible. And I hope I will consult Himanshu ji and get his thoughts later on what things we can do and how we can make this a big thing. The same thing with cultural history. I think that's something that I really want to develop into a vertical and not just talk about political history. We hopefully will be able to talk a lot more about cultural history as well. Sorry about you saying.
I think it's a very important point, and you should connect to Himanshu. I'll connect the two of you. He's a wonderful person. He does qissa goi, he talks, does these stories. He has a beautiful book. In fact, one of the sessions I did with him was called Qissa Lucknow. And he talked of the other Lucknow, not the Nawabi Lucknow. The Lucknow of which people don't normally see. There's a question, is there an opportunity for students to work with your initiative?
Yes, absolutely. We are working with some fantastic students, and if you can just send me a message on Instagram, or if you can just write to me at pragya.tiwari@gmail.com. It's pragya.tewari@gmail.com. We would love to have students on board, because really students are the people we want to reach out to in terms of readership, in terms of giving us ideas. We're all fuddy-duddies now. The future belongs to students. So hopefully that more and more students who are a part of this.
There's this 14-year-old Danish. He's from Ayodhya. He is here under the handle Mughal Ideology. And he makes beautiful sketches, which he sent me. He made sketches of a lot of Mughal emperors. He was very worried about the monuments of Ayodhya. He was saying, Bahu Begum ka Maqbara toot raha hai, and what are we doing about it? Another person you could get in touch with. He has a question on the changing of history in Rajasthan textbooks.
So, what we would like to publish and we are working on is, Danish, we are trying to collate the history of how textbooks in India have taken shape. How many times so we're working with some academics who've done work on this, on how history textbooks, due to political reasons, due to other sort of sociological reasons, have changed over a period of time, changed back, and not just in the national syllabus, what we call CBSE and ICSE or whatever, but also in sort of regional boards. So in Kerala, in Karnataka, in Rajasthan as well. Again, these are studies that are sort of dense, and they are not very accessible when it comes to reading them, but we're trying to kind of simplify it and publish it. And hopefully that will give people a perspective of how we've distorted history over and over and over again. Of course, what's happening right now is just absolutely insane, but give people a sense of the sort of ways in which we have compromised what we've taught our teachers. And frankly, even someone like me who went to an ICSE school, if I didn't have access to the kind of books I had access to at home, my idea of history would have been very limited, even though I went to school at a time when we didn't have right-wing forces distorting history.
Pragya, we've got 1 minute left. Would you like to come back?
Yes.
So we'll all those who are here, as soon as this session finishes, I'll come back. Rachita, your question is very important. Please do ask it in the next session. Her question is the revival of history like a movement, a parallel movement to the mass misinterpretation of history? So we'll take this in the next session. There's only 1 minute left. I don't think you can answer it in that much time.
Done. I'll just...
Can you please suggest some book to... what is your take on discovery of India? In 1 minute, I think whatever you can say, we'll continue it in the next session.
I cannot talk about discovery of India in 1 minute. It's too important to me. Let's just come back.
We'll come back and talk about it.
We're coming back.
Danish, we've just answered your question. And as I said...
but I want to say one more thing to Danish. So please stick around. I want to talk to you about Bahu Begum Ka Maqbara. So just stick around and I'll say something when we come back.
He sent me a very anguished post one day, a message about how the monuments in Ayodhya are slowly deteriorating. They're not being looked after. And he sent me some photographs that his grandfather had taken, some that he's taken, to show the comparison between then and now. And they were very disturbing. I went to Ayodhya many years ago when I think I must have been a teenager. So I have to go again. And I'll go with you.
Definitely.
Inshallah.
We'll meet Danish there.
And we'll meet Danish there. And Himanshu ko bhi bula lenge wahan pe.
Done. And Yatendra, so we'll have a party.
And Yatendra. So we are just about to go off, but we'll be back. I'll send you the next invite as soon as we go off. I was just trying to save the previous video before coming back. Pragya, I have sent you a invitation. Yes. So I was just saving the previous video before coming live again. I said I didn't want that to
Thank
be.
you for doing that. I was hoping that you'll be able to do that. I again don't want to take too much of your time, Appa, but maybe we can talk a little bit about the.
This is, as I said, this is going to be the last session that I'm doing. So let us talk about it and discuss everything. Take everybody's question. There are so many questions that there are. So we'll start with Discovery of India. Something again I read as a child and have seen and heard so many times. Read and seen the series.
So Discovery of India, I think, is a fantastic book, and I do. I do understand the objections that a lot of people have in terms of, um, saying that, well, why was Nehru being taught in schools? It's a way of politicization by the Congress, etc., etc. However, when you and perhaps that's true. I mean, at the end of the day, Nehru was a political figure. But I think what we keep forgetting is that Nehru was not just Congressy. Nehru was a much larger figure than that. He may have belonged to a particular political party, which was really just the de facto political party at that point in time. But Nehru was also somebody who was in the sort of midst of history as it was happening. He was a role that was life-changing and epoch-defining was thrust upon him. Some of it he took on himself, some of it he just sort of had to take on, and he had to rise to the occasion. And it's really, really valuable that Nehru has written as much as he has about the process of becoming the man he was. Because what happens when you read his text is that not only do you get a sense of the man, but you also get a sense of everything else that was going on around him. So, and that is a very sort of a very accessible way of reading and understanding and incorporating history, imbibing history rather. So having said that, I don't look at Discovery of India as a political text at all. I look at it as the text of somebody who went on a journey at a particular time in India and what he came away with. And in that sense, it's an absolutely invaluable text of somebody trying to understand the history of India through scholarship, through journeys, and through introspection, and through interaction with a lot of social and political forces that were around him. And it would be a pity if we were not, all of us, to read Discovery of India. That is not to say that we should worship Nehru blindly or take every sentence given, written in Discovery of India as given history. No, we should understand what that text is, what its importance is, and read it in that particular context. But absolutely, it must be read. And I think Shyam Benegal did a fantastic job with Bharatik Bhoj of making it into a series. However, nothing can take away from the original text, and I really feel like it should be made available widely.
There's another book by Sitaramaiah called Feathers and Dust. He wrote it while they were in Ahmednagar jail, and Nehru is writing Discovery of India, and he describes that. That's again a very beautiful text which I would recommend to people to read. He talks about Nehru making breakfast one day. And these are things when they are in jail, how they are managing, how they were, some of them were removed when they're coming from Bombay to Ahmednagar when they're coming. Gandhiji, I think, is sent off to another jail. So it's a lovely piece, a record of our history, of our freedom movement. So I would recommend to those who are listening that do read Sitaramaiah's Feathers and Dust. Rachita.
Absolutely. And sorry, just one. What we really talking about Ahmednagar jail. What we recently published a couple of days ago is an essay that Nehru had written while he was in Almora jail for Modern Review called "The Mind of a Judge." Now we keep forgetting that Nehru's education was actually as a barrister, as a lawyer, and in that text there are such incredible contemplations about the criminal justice system, and it is so important to kind of read that in the context of what's happening today. I mean, today, a large number of problems in India, actually, which we think of as political problems, are problems with a very deeply rotten criminal justice system. And these were questions that Nehru was asking pre-independence, sitting in a jail cell. And and only someone like him could have had the gall to ask questions like this, where he straight away says, how are judges who come from such a different class to be able to contemplate why crime happens, given that the bulk of criminals that they are dealing with come from a different social strata. And there's some very, very poignant questions that today we'd probably be loath to ask, because we've also become so careful about political correctness. Sorry, you were saying, Rachita had a question.
No. Rachita's question is the revival of history a parallel movement to the one that is misrepresenting history?
Yes and no. I mean, it can have the effect of countering misrepresentations of history, but I hope that it can be more than that. I hope that, like I was saying earlier, I would also very much like Indian History Collective to be about cultural history, to be about oral history, not just confined to maybe the 2 or 3 point agenda that history has been reduced to today by sort of, you know, social media trolls and politically motivated commentators. I mean, it's not just about saying, no, Patel and Nehru did not hate each other. No, Shastri was, you know, very much a part of Congress. Or, you know, it's not just the 5 point or 6 point agenda. I hope to kind of, for it to be something much larger, perhaps even larger than ourselves, and out, you know, probably live on even after we are gone. I know that's a lofty ambition, but hopefully it'll be more than just that.
I'm sure it will. We are joined by Mr. Saruri, who is from Iran. He says, among the many people and races who have come in contact with us and influenced India's life and culture, the oldest and most persistent has been the Iranian. Yes. So he loves Nehru. And, you know, whenever I've gone to Iran, I've always felt so welcome there. The minute they come to know you are an Al-Hindi, they immediately hug you and start giving you gifts. So there's a lot of warmth for Indians over there.
Which it should be. We have so much, you know, common culture. I used to, when I was a child, because my father was very fond of Ghalib, I used to think Persian is an Indian language. And I think I was 9 or 10 years old when somebody told me that it's not in fact an Indian language, and I was absolutely offended. And I said, no, it's an Indian language, and it's from UP. So there you go.
So I think we are such a big part of the Persianate culture. So Persian is our language.
Yes.
So Salim is saying, Salim Tyagi, it's very depressing sometimes when people misjudge Nehru without the knowledge of his literary excellence and make it an absurd argument.
Absolutely. And I think just everything, just deification of Nehru, demolition of Nehru, all of this is problematic. I think just we shouldn't put people up on pedestals, whether it's Nehru or Gandhi or Ambedkar or Akbar or whoever, nor should we spend a lot of energy trying to demolish them. I think we should just treat them as exceptionally valuable historical characters who have played a very important role in shaping our history, and read widely what they said and understand the context in which they operated. And we'd be so much the richer for it without trying to defend him or demolish him.
I think we'll take one last question because there are no more questions. This is from, again, Rachita, who wants to talk about, I've forgotten it's on top, but something about the letters to a daughter. Faiza, these are uploaded on IGTV. Rachita wanted to know something about Nehru's letters to Indira Gandhi. What do they tell us, or what can we learn from it?
You know, it's very interesting. I have often thought about, so there are 2 things to remember. One is that, of course, he's writing these letters. He's in jail. He understands that it is probably going to be intercepted by the British and read by them. before they actually get to Indira Gandhi, his daughter. He also, I think Nehru had a very keen sense of his own destiny. So again, this is not something that I can, present evidence for, but something in those letters gives me a sense that he knew they would be preserved for posterity. But it's also important to remember that the edition that we get, that's available right now, is edited by Sonia Gandhi. So it is being, in fact, edited by a family member. And in that sense, it's quite possible that we are seeing a slightly sanitized version of what he was writing to his daughter. But I think what's really, really important to me when I read those letters is that there's this man who is trying to pass on his intellectual legacy to another generation, to his daughter. And in talking to his daughter about history, he's not just talking to himself, but he's also talking to all future generations. Because like I said, Nehru had a keen sense of his destiny. He knew somewhere at the back of his head that these letters might be preserved and might be read. And to me, it's also very moving because we still live at a time when there is daughters and fathers don't think that they should be giving their daughters their intellectual legacy. Rather, they are, to be married off or not to be educated and so on and so forth. So he's also setting a very, very important example at that point in time when this was not very common, to write letters into your daughter in which you're talking about sort of the history of India, the social and political problems of the country, etc., etc. So I think some of these things are very, very remarkable, and they are very modern in the sense that I think they are an excellent template for all of us to emulate in terms of remembering and thinking about what it is that we should be talking to the next generation about, talking to our children about.
And your collective is again a very important step in that direction, because we are now talking to the next generation. And you talked about cultural history. That is what is my interest, in which I keep trying to document. It's very, very important to document all the things that have, of the past, because people say, "Acha, pehle ye hota tha." There are so many things which are still happening, and when you keep reading, you realize that just things are just evolving. Maybe there are a few changes, but it's the same customs are being followed even today. So as you said, oral history, cultural history, everything. It's not only political history which we have to preserve. We have to preserve oral history. We have to preserve cultural history. We have to preserve everything that there is. Another thing that I feel, like when we were growing up, our grandparents would be there with us. We would spend summer vacations with them. And we learned so much of history, especially of the families and the people around us, and of the syncretic culture that we were living in from our grandparents. Today in nuclear families, parents don't have time, and children have been outsourced to technology, and that's where they pick up internet history from. So that again is a very, very, all those who are watching who have young children, please make sure that your children access Indian History Collective. They read sources which are authentic and authenticated. Don't let them read WhatsApp history. That's my appeal to you. Anyone who's, it can be from anybody. Somebody has even suggested that you should start a WhatsApp listing of your group of your own and start sending WhatsApp messages.
We are thinking about that. We are definitely thinking about that. And you're absolutely right. History is not just political history. It's our music, it's our food, it's our puzzles, our pahelis, it's our folk culture, it's our theatre. And without preserving that, there is no point in just simply squabbling over and reducing history to a Patel versus Nehru argument. I think it's just a travesty if that is what we think history study is about.
And all of you who are here, if you have somebody is saying that I learned Tej, that I learned more from my parents, grandparents about Sikh and Punjabi history. All of those of you who have learned from your parents, please record it. You can send it to Pragya, and if it's worthy, she will put it up on her
Please
collective.
do.
So all of you, please write down your history, whatever you have heard from your parents, grandparents, write it down and send it to her so that it's preserved.
And if you have books, you have access to books, you have access to documents in your families, your grandfather has written a diary, maybe somewhere that you would like for us to digitize and preserve, please pass that on. Go to indianhistorycollective.com. There is our email ID there. Write to us. It's a very personal project. We are sitting behind those computers. We're reading all your emails, and it would be incredibly valuable if you could become a part of this collective. This shouldn't just be up to us or up to Appa. Appa, you are somebody, and I say this on record, who has deeply inspired me to do this. So I'm really happy that you're one of the first people I'm talking to about this in such an extensive manner. But I really hope that we can pass the baton, and there are lots more people who can join in.
And Danish, you can go onto this website and send all your questions there, and as well as the photographs that you sent to me, because he has a valuable archive of photographs from his grandfather's time. And
my God, that would be a treasure. That would be a treasure, Danish, and I hope to see you someday in Ayodhya and talk to you about all my memories of Bahu Begum ka Maqbara and my obsession with Bahu Begum, and how I've managed to basically find all the rare books in which there's any bayan of the Begums of Awadh, particularly Bahu Begum, the last Begum and the last ruler of Faizabad.
There is a question from Ekta. She says, I don't think it's a question. I had to learn from the British here in London. I'm a teacher now. I'm an Indian female wanting help to decolonize our history curriculum here in the UK. So you can also just email Pragya on the Indian History Collective. There is a form, contact form there, and take it from there, and you can see so much of material that we've already talked about, which is about the colonial period. So you can talk about that over there, and I'm sure this will go forward. Any other questions?
Yeah, please be a part of our journey, and hopefully through that process we'll have a lot of resources to be able to take on the project of decolonization of history in the UK itself.
I'll be sending you a lot of names you can talk to of people who have oral archives. And there is
I'm going to keep bugging you all my life to make sure that we are going in the right direction. You are absolutely invaluable to me as a resource.
And
thank you so much, Appa. Thank you for your time. This has been very nice and very kind of you.
And thank you so much for coming and for talking to us and for this beautiful project. It's something very close to my heart. And thank you everybody who has come and joined us.
And sorry who joined us late. Appa is also starting a new project of her own, and the details are there on her Instagram. I will definitely be watching out for it and attending it. So should you.
Okay, thank you. And you can check out Walk Through History. It's on my Instagram and on my Facebook, everywhere. You'll find it everywhere. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you all of you. Very kind of you to listen to us and to interact with us.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.